Hello, it's Young Europe again. I'm today in wonderful Brussels. I have another special guest today, and I would kindly ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Christopher Glück. I'm the president of the Young European Federalists. We are a pretty large organization all across Europe in 30 countries in and beyond the European Union, all working towards a more integrated, more democratic and freer Europe with all sorts of different means and actions. And you're now here with us in our headquarters in Brussels, right next to the European Parliament, where we host our permanent staff. And I'm lucky enough as the president of the organization to be based permanently here as well. So looking forward to discussing our organization with you.
Cool. Thank you for the invitation. So you're the president of Young European Federalists. How old are you?
I'm 30 years old.
30 years old. So, what was it your goal as, let's say, as a teenager or as a child to become president of the Young European Federalists?
No, not really. No, I think that is something that happened step by step. And only really when I'm honest, I always thought in my early years of the involvement with JEF, I've been doing this now for some 10 years and different levels. In the beginning, I thought this is all very interesting. It's nice to meet people, to discuss politics, to do some public actions, to also support what we believe in. But also, I always thought this would help me to learn for the real thing, for the real job. And I think that's still what many JEFers believe. This way, we play politics a bit, we learn to organize, we learn to chair meetings. This will all be helpful for when it really matters. And frankly, only in terms of my first years of professional work, being in the real world where I thought the real thing is happening, I realized perhaps it's a lot more relevant sometimes what we do in JEF Europe or in JEF more generally. And I came to believe that perhaps the real thing is us. It is the activity of young people and the interests of young people in furthering the European idea and European integration. So that's been a bit of a development for me. Now I'm really enjoying it. It's not a job I'm going to do for a very long time. At some point you need to move on and make space for the next generation. But while I'm doing it, I'm loving it. But it's not been my life goal.
I'm certainly interested in you being the JEF president. But let's to better understand why you're doing what you're doing. Let's go a few steps back. Like, how did you start? What did you do after your A level? What was the idea? What was the vibe after the A level? You're from where? From?
I'm from Germany, from Stuttgart, in the southwest of Germany. That's also where I finished high school, and afterwards I'm still the last generation in Germany that had to do military or civilian service. Afterwards, it was scrapped. But
did you like the military service?
I did not do military service. So I did the civilian service, and frankly, I benefited from it. I really enjoyed it. I was in a program where I was put in the city administration of Stuttgart. It was a special program for young people who are a bit politically interested. We had some classes on public administration, on EU law, but also we were very closely involved with the day-to-day politics in the local administration. And that has all its upsides and downsides, of course. But overall, I realized I really enjoy working in a political field and making things happen in politics. And so that led me to study history and political science afterwards, which I did in Munich. And that's also about the time where I got involved with JEF. I was in the town hall in Stuttgart, and there was an office that was rarely occupied, but had Young European Federalists, Junge Europäische Federalisten, as the name tag on the door. And that got me curious. And then I got involved, and together with a couple of friends, we relaunched the local section in Stuttgart.
But was there like some operation? Was this, let's say, a chapter or a department? Yeah. Was it active? Or did you like relaunch? Because
we relaunched it a bit. Yeah, sometimes that happens in our network that local sections become sleepy a bit with people moving on, and that was the case there. And then
there's perhaps
we relaunched it.
a lot of fluctuation since
There
students
is.
come and go and move.
There is. It's a youth organization after all, and it's one of the big challenges in our organization to provide continuity in some way and knowledge management and to keep the organization running. But there's always fluctuation, and really over the years that I'm now involved with JEF, I've seen sections become very strong and then go very small again, and then perhaps pick up again. And well, when I started in Stuttgart, I wasn't really aware there was a European level to it. I thought this might be a local club, and only step by step I found out about the whole scale of the organization, which got me quite excited about it.
What would you say? It sounds like you were quite excited about Europe. This is why you joined the club. There are different types of clubs around universities, right? There are so many different types, and you specifically decided for yourself to, together with your friends, to go to start JEF. What would you say sparked in you this desire?
Yeah. I'm perhaps a bit of an unusual case there. Most people involved in JEF have lived Europe before. They perhaps went on Erasmus, or they experienced Europe in some other way, and then felt that reality, political reality, perhaps isn't quite in tune with the way they felt about Europe and the way they identify as a European citizen. For me, it was a bit the other way around. I heard about JEF, and I thought about the idea of European federalism and a more united Europe, and I thought it all made sense and found it very interesting and inspiring. Then I got to know the organization a bit better, and was impressed with just how idealistic and energetic the members are, which got me even more interested in doing this work. And then only through being a JEF member, I started to have European experiences myself. So I then eventually moved on to study European affairs, and then I found jobs in the EU field. But it was really JEF first, and then my European experience afterwards.
How do you balance the activity? Well, first of all, what do you? I have two questions. What do you do at JEF, especially at the beginning of your career in this organization? And how did you balance this with your study program? Like, you have to learn as a student, right? So being active in an organization, a student organization, and learning, like every good student, of course, does.
It's sometimes a challenge, but it's also very rewarding. And I always took energy out of working for JEF, while sometimes it's a bit strenuous as well. There's a hashtag we started to use a few years ago, which says "Sleep less, Europe more," and sometimes really that is what we do, and we save up a bit on our night's sleep to put in a few more hours in our activities. That's not how it should be, though. In the end, we somehow need to balance our time. For me, it always worked more or less, but that's also to do with me just really, really enjoying this, and perhaps at times where university, which I loved, studying history and political science, but there are always times in university where it's a bit annoying, right? You have to do these papers, and it's perhaps a topic you don't really get into, and then I found it quite relaxing and positive to have something on the side that I really cared about, and where I could be productive and put things together. So that somehow always worked for me. But yeah, I see how this is a problem, and it's certainly more and more a problem with more condensed study plans, and we see that happening where people try to rush through a study program in less semester than foreseen. It becomes really difficult, and also what we experience in our generation is that more and more people are worried about whether they will find a job afterwards, and perhaps prioritize doing things that directly lead to job opportunities, internships of all sorts, or work on the side. Whereas while I believe that JEF is beneficial for that, and many employers look for people who do this kind of work on the side, that's not so obvious sometimes to young people, and they feel perhaps they need to save up a bit of time on their voluntary activities. But overall, we're still doing well, and I think many people have that experience, that it's somehow also helpful.
Do you remember how was it like while you were active at JEF at the first university? Because you later started a master, but at the first university, how was like? I assume you still had contact with people who are not in JEF. What was like the reaction? What was like the feedback when you told, look, I am now, I don't have time today, buddy, I have to be active at JEF. Like, is it like, wow, cool, could you explain us more? Or is it like, ooh, I don't have so much time for this? What was the feedback of people around you?
There's both. I mean, usually people are interested. If you know them a bit and they're friends, they won't just discard something that you really care about. At least they shouldn't. And then I've certainly made the experience that some friends told me at some point that, it's also enough and you should also make time to go and have a drink with a friend every now and then and not just do work. But overall, I made the experience that people find it quite impressive if people put their time and energy in something idealistic and are sometimes even motivated to join themselves. So most of my close friends from my undergraduate years have either in JEF or in other organizations also been active, and we kind of reinforced each other in doing this work and encouraged each other in taking up new challenges in that field. I guess I was very lucky to find these friends who were so supportive in me doing this. Perhaps also what was a bit different is when I started, the atmosphere in Europe was very different. That was, as I said, 10 years ago, and the Lisbon Treaty had just been signed, and we were. It seemed like this is a process that will not stop. Europe is ever going to be more integrated, and there's perhaps not really the need to work for this so hard. And then very rapidly after I started, the economic crisis and the Eurozone crisis started putting the project a bit more in doubt, and people started realizing why it's so important to be active if we want to maintain the European Union that we have, or even build it further and integrate Europe further. That helped me explaining it a bit more. In the beginning, people really said, "Do you think that is the biggest problem we have?" That really changed over the last decade.
So while you were at JEF in Munich, did you have contact like with people from JEF, but not from Germany, rather from other countries from Europe?
Yeah, it took me a bit to discover the international side to JEF Europe. I knew there were other sections, but I was very focused on our local activities and didn't make the extra time to go on the international seminars. But once I did, I realized that there is a huge benefit to that, to discuss the European Union with people from beyond the own country. And I saw that this is a big advantage also of our organization, that we're not just in one country, but we actually have this network which is informing our views, but also gives you friends all across Europe. And when you travel, you most certainly find somebody in the place you go that is also active in the organization that perhaps you've met at some seminar. And I started to really enjoy that. In my undergraduate years, it was mainly with France. We did a lot of work with JEF France and exchanges in Strasbourg and common events in Strasbourg, which I really enjoyed, and which also encouraged me to study a bit more French, which then helped me for my further studies. And then moving on from that, it became even more international. But as most Germans, my European experience kind of started with the Franco-German friendship.
Okay. Did you have some special, are there different positions at JEF? Like, how are you organized? Like a section at the university level? And did you had some position? Did you had some, I don't know, leadership experience at JEF in Munich?
Not in Munich. I was in Stuttgart. I was leading the local section. And when I moved to Munich, I was active in the section there and helped. There was another section that wasn't doing very well at the time, and I helped building this up with a group of friends. But my main activity stayed in Stuttgart and Baden-Württemberg, which is the larger region around Stuttgart. And I then took different positions in that part of JEF until I moved to the European level.
You started the activity at JEF already before you started to study.
Yeah, during my civilian service is
okay.
when I discovered it and relaunched JEF in Stuttgart. Yeah.
Okay. And did you have some special position to get leadership experience?
Yeah, I was leading different boards on different levels throughout that time, and I think that is probably one of the big advantages of being in JEF, the early responsibility that you get. You have quite a substantial budget, often to deal with, a group of some 8-9 people to lead, which is a good experience and really helped, I think, in me becoming a bit more professional also in the way I go about things and I organize things. Yeah.
Cool. So you had contact with other Europeans, especially from France. You were obviously quite interested in the European project. But have you been like also engaged in other organizations, maybe in other clubs or political parties?
Yes, I have been, but my main focus was always on JEF, and that took up most of my time. There wasn't so much time left to engage with other organizations. What I did straight after my civilian service was that I was in the organization that was promoting that kind of civilian service close to the mayor, close to the city administration, combined with a training program for other cities in Stuttgart, sort of a sort of consultancy role of young people, which was quite interesting. I did that for a while and also became a party member, but never really picked up activity on that side. Probably just because I was too occupied with JEF, and I always found it more enjoyable. And so that became more or less of a supportive membership, but not really active.
Cool. What did you like after you finished your study program in Munich? What did you decide to do then? Did you start to work or?
I had a year of a break between my undergrad and my master's, in which I worked in Berlin for Europa Union, which is the adult organization, if you like, of the Young European Federalists, as a project manager for a couple of months. And by the end of that time, I had decided I wanted to study at the College of Europe in Poland and focus even more on European affairs. And for that, it was necessary to really master French. And that led me then to move to Paris. And I spent half a year in Paris and got a lot of support from the JEFers there to integrate and study the language, and eventually found an internship as well with European alternatives, and that was a pretty good time. And then I moved on from there to Warsaw, to the College of Europe in Natolin, and studied European affairs.
Well, why did you decide to study at College of Europe?
It goes back a bit to the history of the College of Europe. I always felt that while I understand why political science wants to be neutral and seen as a real science, I like that College of Europe was almost a bit out of this time in their very normative approach, in their thinking about how can we teach young people to make a difference, teach them enough about Europe for them to be able to support the vision of an ever closer union. And I like that approach. And I like that it went back to the Hague Congress in 1948. It was founded there or created there in the first time. It's also the place where the Federalist movement started and the Council of Europe started. And I thought that history was really appealing. So I got interested in the program, and then I spoke to alumni from the university who all had very positive views, and it's also, after all, it's also a university that helps you find a job in the field. And that got me interested in applying, which I did, and that also was a good and positive process. A huge advantage of that is also that it provides a full scholarship, which many international universities do not do. And so studying in the UK would probably, for financial reasons, not have been an option for me. But at the College of Europe, it was possible.
How was what do you remember at the beginning of studying College of Europe? as far as I know, there are students from all over Europe.
Yeah.
Probably more than at average university. Let's say average university.
Yeah.
How was the beginning? What was like the atmosphere like?
I felt a bit like at a seminar of JEF, really, because there are national contingents in the student body. We were 100 students, and I think just about 30 nations. So that was really international and a really interesting atmosphere. Very interesting people, often people who in some way have contributed to their societies, were active politically or in the wider societal field, and who were there for a reason and with a purpose. Were there because they wanted to make a change and believed in Europe. And I always thought the atmosphere was incredible and really nice, and something you probably won't find in a different university. Oh.
Okay, so it was a good decision. What did you study exactly? Like, what was the subject?
It was interdisciplinary, and I focused a lot on the law side and on European neighborhood relations. So always interested in the Mediterranean neighborhood, and then Poland has a big focus, of course, towards the east a bit more. And I was also there during the time of Euromaidan in Ukraine, so that became a topic that I got very interested in. And those were pretty much the focus points of my study.
Did you already knew some people there at the College of Europe from your activity in JEF, or?
I didn't know. In my year, I didn't know anyone before, but afterwards, you know everybody very well. But,
what's the average size of a class? Like, is it big, like at big universities, like several hundreds, or is it like small? And
it's a very small university. It's a campus a bit outside of the city of Warsaw, where you live and study, and it's around 100 students per year. And then there are classes where you're all together 100 students, and then sometimes it's also split into smaller groups, perhaps of 10, 15, 20 people. But overall, because you live so closely together for a whole year with 100 people, it becomes a very tight-knit community.
It was in Poland, right? Was it like it's small university, full scholarship, close bound to the European history? Was it hard to get in? Like, it sounds like a lot of people would like to study there.
It's surprisingly easy to get in, really. I think many people think the way you do and say, this is probably not for me, and so they don't apply. I think if you can prove to the selection committee that you have an idea why you want to be there, and you believe in the European Union, and you believe in the European project, and this is not just a fancy university for you to score a good job somewhere, but that you want to make something positive out of this. And then you have some decent grades, at least in university. I think there's all the chances to get in. It's not that much of an elite club, really.
Cool. Okay, you finished your master. What was the next step? Like, did you get a job somewhere, or?
I did. So one of the peculiar things about the College of Europe is that most countries, so the selection happens on a country-by-country basis, and most countries send recent graduates. The UK, however, sends civil servants, people who already work in the ministry and take a role that's a bit more EU-facing. And to be able to be doing that job well, they sometimes get the opportunity to go for a year there. And one of these British civil servants made me aware of a job offer at the British Treasury, for which I applied and got the job. So pretty much right after my time at the College of Europe, I moved to London and worked at the British government for a bit more than 2 years. And a really crucial time, of course. We were still very much in EU negotiations, and that was a brilliant experience to be representing the UK in the European Council. But then, I mean, the 2 years of my time in the UK also ended with Brexit. So just about the time where I felt this could be a place where I would like to stay, perhaps. I realized perhaps it's not the country that I've always thought I knew, and I had then to realize that I need to make a decision. Can I still support that, or is make Brexit a success not something that I feel I can sign up to even as a civil servant and with all the culture of serving the government of the day, and that led me to take the decision. Okay, it's now the time to move.
While you were in London, and if I got it right, you have been there while there was the campaign for the Brexit and the referendum for the Brexit. How did you experience and how did you observe the interest, like the general interest of people who got campaigned for the vote for this referendum?
I think there was a lot of interest in the campaign, which perhaps wasn't fully reflected in the turnout, which was lower than many people would have expected, particularly for young people. But there was a lot of interest. I mean, Brexit and the campaign was on all the headlines throughout the months leading up to the referendum. What I think might have contributed to people not going to vote in the end was a feeling of confusion, of too many facts flying around, perhaps not being cleared up. And there was a very effective disinformation campaign by the side of Leave EU, which in a very professional manner spread lies and myths in this referendum campaign, which at that rate could not be cleared up effectively by the Remain side. Nor did media really play its role, but decided to give those lies and myths as much space in their broadcasting as the factual arguments from the Remain side. I think a big problem of the Remain side really was not to try to get people emotionally convinced of the idea of European unity and European integration. But it was a very rational argument, calculating how many pounds would be lost for a normal middle-income family in case there is leave. And while those numbers are probably correct, it wasn't the right message. And people, in a way, took a decision out of an anger, out of a dissatisfaction with how things are going. And they were willing to pay a bit for sending that angry message. So probably... But afterwards, you're always smarter. But probably it would have been the right thing to do to explain why Europe is such a good idea and how Europe can help us going to a brighter future and help solving the problems, addressing the problems that people rightly worried about: automation, globalization, climate change, all issues that the UK can't deal with alone. And perhaps that should have been put front and center in the campaign, but that didn't happen. And also that couldn't happen with a Tory government that for years and years spoke negatively about Brussels. And even when Cameron decided that he's happy with the renegotiated deal that then was put to the referendum, he announced that by saying, "I love Britain, not Brussels." And that's unnecessary. And with this kind of branding, it was very difficult to turn it around into a positive campaign.
Was it a mistake to put it on the referendum to?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the idea to have people vote on stay or unclear what the alternative is just irresponsible. If anything, it should have been clear what the alternative is, and that being portrayed to citizens. I mean, the kind of narrative that was used of we can stay in the single market but curb immigration and go out and make trade deals with the rest of the world is just complete nonsense. But that was a vision that was able to be sold to citizens because it wasn't clear what the alternative to remaining in the EU is. It was a very risky and irresponsible decision by David Cameron to call a referendum at that point.
So you worked in London, you experienced live the campaign and the vote, and then you decided to leave London. What was your next step? What was like? How did you feel? What was like you experienced something in London. What did you take from London with you, and where did you went?
I took a lot from London. I really enjoyed working in London, and it was my first very serious job. And I learned a lot about how to do work, about professionalism, about policy making, about EU negotiations. I really enjoyed my time there. I'm very grateful for having had that opportunity. I think that's something I took away. But also I had the feeling I want to work somewhere where I'm contributing to a goal that I believe in. And a natural course for me as a European Federalist, of course, was the European capitals. I went to Brussels. I found a job at the European Parliament. I worked for a German member of the European Parliament for 2 years. Really enjoyed it. Sometimes a bit tough, the work in the Parliament. It can be very strenuous. Depends a bit on who your MEP is. It's always short-termist. It's very little planning. It's a lot of reaction on short notice. Sometimes you get a bit upset about the lack of quality in the outcomes of the decisions. But overall, it's a very inspiring place because it's buzzing, it's political, things are happening. It's a fascinating place to work.
What was your task as when you worked in the European Parliament?
Yeah. I was in the Econ Committee, as a committee of economic and financial affairs. So a lot of the things we did was on banking regulation and Eurozone governance. Sounds extremely boring. It's a good thing to end the conversation. But I quite enjoyed it. And actually it's a policy area where when you get into it, it's not rocket science. It's quite understandable. It's quite common sense. And it's often a language that is used that makes it a bit incomprehensible and also keeps outsiders out. But it's relatively easy to learn that language. And then you realize the topics debated are deeply political. And that makes it very fascinating and interesting. And it's also an area where decisions are so clear. It's almost mathematical in finances. You do a policy option A and you know what the outcome is. And that makes it quite makes it quite fascinating as well. So I was working on the policy side, which means in the Parliament, you have a lot of reports that go through the Parliament, legislative proposals from the European Commission. They go to this committee, and then as an assistant of an MEP, what you would do is you look at them and you think through what does this proposal achieve, and is that in line with what my member of Parliament wants to achieve? And if not, what should be changed in the proposal to make it go more into the direction that we want? You suggest that to your member. Hopefully the member agrees. And then you try to make these changes. And you bring it into the political debate. And then there is a lot of speeches to be written and press releases to be written and preparations for other meetings to inform your member on other files that are going on, so your member is able to feed in a positive way. And that's pretty much the role. And it's constantly changing because you always get new files almost every day. So it's an interesting job, but it's also a job that people don't do for a very long time usually. It's a couple of years and then people move on.
What were like I have many questions to this, but the first question is like what was the hot topic in your time there in the committee where you work? What was driving the discussions? What was the subject with the most attention?
I mean, the key issue was still that the Eurozone is still not safe, and we all know it. And we know the Eurozone is growing again. Economic growth is picking up, but we won't withstand the next deep crisis. The architecture of the Eurozone still isn't stable, and there is a lot of discussion on how to address this. And the issue there is that both is needed on both sides. What is needed is more responsibility by European governments in terms of stability, which the geeks in the European Parliament would call risk reduction. And so I believe a lot more must happen on that side. Governments borrowing less or national banks buying less debt from their own sovereign. And only when we have achieved that, we can move to more solidarity. And then there's others who say, we've done so much risk reduction already, it's time now to have solidarity mechanisms and find out what can we do actually when a crisis hits one member state particularly harshly, and we need to react somehow, but this member state doesn't have the capacity to react to it. So that's been a bit of the debate. What do we need first, and what kind of solidarity tools can we have? Do we need a Eurozone budget? Do we need a European unemployment insurance? Do we need a deposit insurance? And then what are the conditions on the risk reduction side to make these things happen? That's been the big debate. It's still unresolved.
And I wonder if, compared to the Commission and to the Council, and especially to the in your case, to the European Central Bank, can the European Parliament decide so much in this area? Is it what's the influence of the European Parliament?
It's bigger than people would think. I mean, the real power still sits with the Council, with the member states. If the member states don't want a deal, it's impossible to strike a deal. And that's really where the blockage has been, and we can quite finger point that the blockage has been with Germany in the past years in the Council. But the Parliament is important, and there are multiple occasions in the past years where it's also been the Parliament making decisions a bit more difficult, or it's been the Parliament pushing for things and putting things on the table that were then difficult to ignore. On the big bargain that I just tried to sketch out a bit, what are the big solidarity tools that we need in response to the increased responsibility of member states? That's difficult for the Parliament to lead the way. They try, of course. There are reports that sketch out a compromise, but it hasn't really been picked up. Where the Parliament is really important is when you speak about individual legislative proposals. So the things that come out that establish the banking union, for example, that was in the committee I worked with as well. And there the Parliament is absolutely important. It's on equal footing with the Council, sometimes even a bit better coordinated as the Council with the changing presidencies. So the Parliament really has a big role in defining the concrete legislation that's coming out of the EU.
Would you, what's your opinion? It's argued that the European Parliament has not, compared to the Commission, not the right to initiate new legislation, right? What's your opinion in it? Should the Parliament have more power in this issue?
Yes, I think the Parliament should be granted a bit more powers, also in that sense. While I also see the advantage of the Commission being able to act as a strong executive. I think the real issue is the strength of the European Council, which very often is blocking legislation, not picking up files that are ready by the Parliament and then ready to go into discussions with the Council, but the Council is not there or doesn't want to be there. That's the big blockage. I think in the long run we might want to move into a direction where most decisions are taken between Commission and Parliament, and the Council is involved on some decisions as a second chamber. But certainly I think the Parliament should become more influential, and the right of initiative, it exists to some degree, but that could be strengthened. What the Parliament also needs to play that role, however, is more capacity. Very often when you look at files, you think, it's so few people working on this in the Parliament, an understaffed office of the political groups, and then MEPs with some 2 or 3 assistants who are often in their 20s and in their first jobs. It's sometimes difficult to get out of this environment the right quality of legislation, and it happens mostly we get there, and it's surprising we get there. But really, if the Parliament is the one decision-making body in the EU, we probably need to staff it better, give it more resources, more expertise, more permanent staff.
In the groups or more in the offices of the Parliament members?
It doesn't probably both. It doesn't really matter. Both would achieve the purpose, and there are different views.
Okay.
My tendency would go towards strengthening the groups, but that's a personal preference, I think.
Okay. The following. So let's say your tendency was the parliament should have more power, right? Before going now to your next position, just one question: How long is the usual day at the parliament? I wonder.
Depends very much who your MEP is, but quite long. Okay. The day starts somewhere between 8 for the early birds to 10 for those who get in a little later, and nobody is really leaving before 7. Many people carry on. In my job, I was often there until late in the night, sometimes around midnight. So it's a long day.
Cool. After that, you became the president of JEF, which is a full-time job.
I was the president of JEF before, for 3 years already. But it's been a voluntary role.
In the parliament?
While I was working in the parliament, also while I was working for the British government. And JEF has been a smaller organization than we had the staff here of some a secretary general and some 2 or 3 other people who were working for us full time. But the board of the organization was volunteer led only, and as a result of increased funding that we got, more activities, more funding, a higher budget, and we realized there's perhaps a bit of a risk that the secretariat and the board do not have the right connection anymore, because it's so hard for the board to follow up on all of the activities that are happening. We suggested to our national sections that we should make a shift and have the president full time in the office, to bridge between volunteer political leadership of the organization and the staff, but also to help communicate what JEF Europe, the European level, is doing to our national sections and to our members, and to be able to play a political role in Brussels that more and more we got. In the beginning, nobody took us seriously a few years ago.
Why?
But because you're a youth organization, right?
Okay.
And youth organizations are often nice and friendly to have, but they're not taken seriously as a policy input. And JEF has very good policy thinkers as well. And it's been one of my ambitions to take that policy expertise that JEF has and try to present that and try to make it visible in Brussels. And I think we managed that pretty well. So more and more, we also get requested to feed in on policy-related topics.
In what subject areas? Where do you take influence? Which policy?
So the main field where people look for our input is on the question of civil society funding and youth organization funding, of course, because that's what we do. But we also get heard quite a bit on matters of Eurozone governance, where JEF has very strong positions and detailed positions. We get heard a lot on questions of enlargement and the Western Balkans. We try to be more visible in the field of migration and asylum. Those are really the issues at the moment that are picked up very well. And then, of course, as Federalists, our key topic is always the institutions. What needs to change to make Europe effective and democratic in its governance? And that's also something, of course, when that comes up, we are the go-to organization.
Okay. Was it a quite different, like now you're full-time president, but before that, for a long time, which I didn't know, for a long time you were already president, but it was more voluntarily.
Yeah.
Like, was it a big difference? And like, how did it change in your work as a president?
Yeah, it's a huge change. I'm still getting used to it. We only started in the beginning of November with it, so it's been a few weeks now. And for now, it still feels like I'm on holidays and just spent a lot of time on JEF in my holidays. I haven't really picked up that this is going to last. But it's a huge change, because suddenly I can take time for things that before were difficult to do, such as this interview, perhaps. But also to just get in touch with sections, get in touch with other organizations, arrange a meeting, introduce what JEF does, and increase communication inside of the organization a lot. So there's always been this list of to-dos that are would be nice to have, but are not essential, that then I never was able to do in my volunteer time, and now I get some more to.
What was like a typical thing you couldn't have done as a volunteer?
So sometimes you would see, for example, in one of our working groups, things are not going quite as well as we wanted, but they're going okay. So there's more important things to deal with, and then I would have just let this go. And now I actually have the time to make a phone call or write an email and then follow up and develop a bit an idea with people what we could be doing. So it's these things where it's not the make it or break it issues in JEF. That was always possible somehow to put this in the evenings or on the weekend. But things that are nice to have, like that, like talking to a volunteer who's not really finding his role or her role, or meeting an organization that is working in a similar field, but we've not really been talking very much, and perhaps there's a chance to cooperate. So get to know them. These are things I never found time to do, and I'm trying to do more now.
Cool. It's 2019. This is a special year for the European Union. There will be a few months. There will be the election for the European Parliament. How does your influence now as your daily work schedule as a JEF president? Do you do something now this year, something special because of the European elections?
The European elections, of course, take a big role in our work on both ends, on the project side and on the policy side of what we do. On the project side, we have a big event with a group of partner organizations over a couple of months, in which we bring together young people to discuss about European affairs and call to vote for pro-European, for Federalist positions. It starts with a big meeting of some 2,000 people in Paris in a few weeks' time. And then what I'm really looking forward to do is a bus tour we will be having throughout Europe. Perhaps several buses, we still have to pin that down, but at least one bus that will travel around Europe and will make stops in different cities, where we will then have events, mostly debates, not the old-fashioned panel debates, but nice, interesting, interactive debates with candidates for the European Parliament and the local JEFers. And then we bring, of course, international JEFers with our bus. They have a chance to exchange as well. So if you travel on the bus for a while, you might get the chance to experience, for example, what is the discussion in Munich, and then you go to the next stop in Prague and you find out what is the discussion that is happening in the Czech Republic, and then you move on and you see what is on minds of people in the next country. And that's something I'm really looking forward to do. I hope that will help. We have a cool partnership as well with Flixbus, who will provide tickets for our activists to travel to the bus stop or back home from where they get off our bus tour. That's a big event we'll be doing. And then on the policy side, of course, we try to be influential. We try to meet with candidates. We try to meet with the political parties. We had a meeting recently with the campaign coordinator of EPP and S&D to talk to them about our ideas for Europe.
What do you recommend when you meet?
The key message that we have is always, you need to have European solutions. There needs to be a clear message that the challenges we face at the moment, the question of an economic growth that's still not safe, the question of climate change, the question of how we deal with a Schengen system, under stress from the migration situation, which is still managed in a very badly way through the patchy work of member states. If we think we can find solutions to that on the nation state level, that might very well spell the end of the European Union. We need to find European answers, and your campaign must be focused on that. Don't give in to the messages of the Eurosceptics, but proudly be European. And then we speak about what precisely the policies might be to address those.
Okay. Last question. If let's say you're surrounded by Europeans, by very sparked, enthusiastic pro-Europeans here in Brussels. But when you're back home, you're in your old neighborhood and you meet people who are not so much well, in work with the European, or
Yeah.
have so much contact with the European project. What do you tell them, especially facing now the upcoming elections?
I think the message is very clear, and I perhaps have a bit of an easier task there than my British friends. But when I'm in Germany, my message is Germany will not be the safe, prosperous island in a Europe that fails overall. We either continue to integrate Europe and to work together with our partners to find European answers to the challenges that we have. And we play our role in that. And we don't, for every single solution, think about how much we put in and how much we get out of it. But we realize that Germany will be the biggest beneficiary of European solutions and of European answers. And so there's this one chance. Either we move forward with Europe and Germany continues to prosper and be well, or we will feel the pain from the surrounding states as well. And Germany will not continue to be that island of the happy in Europe that it's been over the past 5 years.
Chris, thank you for this interview.
Thank you.
Bye.